My name is Ruth Morgan, and I write this account so that someone, someday, might understand what happened to my father and to me in the winter of 1896. I am 24 years old. I live in a boarding house on Elm Street in this small North Carolina town, and I work 6 days each week at the Miller Cartography office, where I trace maps and bind atlases under the supervision of Mr. Edmund Pierce. My father, Thomas Morgan, was a free-born surveyor and mapmaker of considerable skill. He taught me to read longitude and latitude before I could write my own name. He showed me how to render mountains with shadow and rivers with the gentlest curve of ink. When he died 2 years past, he left me his tools, his journals, and a half-finished commission, a series of coastal survey maps that Mr. Pierce's firm had contracted him to complete. Mr. Pierce is a tall man with pale eyes and hands that are always cold when he inspects my work. He hired me 3 months after my father's funeral, not out of kindness, but because I was cheaper than any white draftsman and because I knew my father's methods. The office sits above a dry goods store on Market Street. It smells of ink and old paper and something else, something like metal, left too long in water. There are rules at the Miller Cartography office. I arrive each morning before the clock strikes 7. I do not speak unless spoken to. I do not sit at the main drafting table where the white clerks work. My corner desk faces the wall beneath a window that has been painted shut. When Mr. Pierce enters the room, I must stand and wait for acknowledgement before resuming my work. These rules were never written down, but they were made clear to me on my first day. I accepted them. I needed the wage. My father's journals sit in a wooden crate beneath my bed at the boarding house. They are filled with notations about surveys he conducted across 3 states, Virginia, the Carolinas, and once, years ago, a strange commission that took him north, very far north. He wrote about that journey only once, in a passage near the back of his final journal. The entry is dated 1873, the year before I was born. The man who hired me called himself Mr. Corbett. He showed me a map incomplete, grooey, rendered by a hand I did not recognize. He said it was drawn by a woman cartographer in the 1600s, a woman who had ventured into the Arctic and never returned. He wanted me to verify coordinates. He wanted me to tell him if the passage she had marked was real. I told him I could not say. Some things on a map are drawn from truth. Some things are drawn from fear. My father never mentioned Mr. Corbett again, but 2 weeks ago, that name reappeared. Mr. Pierce called me into his private office. It was the first time I had been summoned there. The room was narrow and windowless, lined with shelves holding rolled maps in wooden tubes. On his desk lay a single chart, its edges browned and brittle with age. "Your father completed work for a man named Corbett many years ago," Mr. Pierce said without preamble. "You will finish what he began." I looked at the map. It depicted a coastline I did not recognize. Jagged, angular, impossible. There were notations in a delicate hand, a woman's hand, written in faded ink. Some of the words were in English. Some were not. "What is this?" I asked. "A relic," Mr. Pierce said, his pale eyes fixed on me. "And a commission. You will complete the missing sections. You will render it properly. You will not ask questions." He slid a second document across the desk, a contract. My name was already written at the bottom in his hand, waiting for my mark. "I have not agreed to this," I said carefully. "You will," Mr. Pierce replied, "or you will leave this office and not return." I signed. That night, I returned to my boarding house and opened my father's journals again. I found the entry about Mr. Corbett and read it by candlelight. Beneath the passage, written in a hand that trembled, my father had added a single line. "Some passages are not meant to be found. Some cartographers are not meant to be followed. I am writing this now because I feel watched, because the map I am meant to complete shows something that should not exist, because Mr. Pierce has begun locking the office door from the inside when I work late, and I can hear him pacing in the room above me. Because yesterday, I found a name written in the margin of the ancient chart, a name that has no place on any map I have ever seen. Elara. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing and becoming part of our community. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from our amazing viewers all around the world. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're listening from and the exact time right now. We're deeply interested in knowing how far and at what times of day or night these documented stories that time tried to erase reach. The work consumed my days. Each morning I arrived before dawn, and each evening I left long after the other clerks had gone home. Mr. Pierce insisted I work alone on the chart, away from curious eyes. He moved my desk into a storage room at the back of the office, a space barely wider than a coffin, with no window and a single oil lamp that smoked when the wick burned low. The map itself was a mystery that deepened with each passing hour. The coastline it depicted belonged to no place I had ever studied. The latitude markings were wrong too far north to be anything but Arctic waters, yet the land formation suggested something else entirely. Mountains that rose in spirals. Inlets that curved back upon themselves in patterns that defied nature. And everywhere, in that delicate feminine hand, were notations. The ice sings here. Passage opens only at the dark of the moon. Do not follow the lights. I began to research in what little time I had. The public library held records of early expeditions, Dutch whalers, English explorers, French fur traders who had ventured into the northern territories. None of their charts matched what lay before me. None of their journals mentioned a woman cartographer. But in a volume of maritime histories published in 1842, I found a single footnote. It referenced an expedition funded by the Dutch East India Company in 1697. The expedition had sought a northwest passage through the Arctic. Among the crew was listed a cartographer surnamed Vance, first name illegible in the ship's manifest. The expedition never returned. 200 years ago, a woman, the Arctic, Elara. I brought this discovery to Mr. Pierce on a Thursday afternoon. He was in his office, reviewing contracts with a man I did not recognize, a gentleman dressed in black wool, his face obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. "Mr. Pierce," I said from the doorway, "I have found a historical reference that may assist with the commission." He looked up slowly. His expression was not curious, but cold. "You were instructed not to research," he said. "You were instructed to complete the work." "But if I understood the origin of the chart—" "You do not need to understand." His voice was flat, final. "You need to obey." The man in black turned slightly. I could not see his face, but I felt his attention settle upon me like frost creeping across glass. "The girl asks too many questions," the man said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, and that made it worse. "Perhaps she is unsuited for this task." "She will learn," Mr. Pierce replied. He stood and moved toward me, closing the distance until I could smell the pomade in his hair and the stale coffee on his breath. "Miss Morgan, you will return to your work. You will complete the northern coastline by week's end. You will speak to no one about this commission. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Say it." "I understand." "Good." He stepped back. "And Miss Morgan, the storage room door will be locked from the outside while you work, for security purposes. You understand?" It was not a question. That evening, I worked by lamplight in the locked storage room. The walls seemed closer than before, the air thicker. I traced the coastline with careful strokes, following the faint guidelines left by Elara Vance 2 centuries prior. Her hand had been steady even in the most intricate passages. Mine trembled. At 9:30, I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the ceiling. Mr. Pierce's office was directly overhead. I had heard him pace before, but tonight the rhythm was different. Tonight it sounded like he was following a pattern. 3 steps forward, pause, 2 steps back, pause, 3 steps forward again. Over and over. I set down my pen and listened. The pattern continued for nearly 20 minutes, never varying, never stopping. Then, abruptly, silence. And in that silence, I heard something else. Singing. It was faint, barely audible, like a voice carried on wind from a great distance. The melody was wordless and cold and utterly alien. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the very bones of the building. I pressed my ear against the door. "Mr. Pierce?" No answer. The singing grew louder, not from above, but from the map. I turned slowly. The chart lay spread across my desk, its aged surface illuminated by the flickering lamp. And there, in the section I had just completed the northern coastline where Elara Vance had written, "The ice sings here," the ink was moving. Not spreading or bleeding, but shifting, rearranging itself into new words. "She is listening." I stumbled backward, my chair clattering to the floor. The lamp flame guttered and nearly died. When it steadied, the words were gone. The ink lay exactly as I had drawn it, unchanged, permanent. But I knew what I had seen. I pounded on the storage room door. "Mr. Pierce, let me out!" Footsteps descended the stairs. A key turned in the lock. The door opened to reveal Mr. Pierce standing in shadow, his pale eyes reflecting the lamplight like a cat's. "You called?" he asked mildly. "I need to leave. Now." "Your work is not finished." "I don't care. Let me pass." He did not move. "You signed a contract, Miss Morgan. You agreed to complete this commission. The consequences of breach are quite severe." He smiled, and it was the first time I had ever seen him smile. "Legal consequences, financial consequences. I would hate for you to lose your position over a moment of female hysteria." I had no choice. I returned to my desk. He locked the door behind me. I worked until midnight, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. When Mr. Pierce finally released me, I walked the dark streets back to my boarding house and did not look behind me, though I felt certain something was following. In my room, I opened my father's journal again and found another entry I had missed before, a loose page tucked into the binding, dated 1873. Corbett showed me a letter today. It was written by a sailor who survived an Arctic expedition in the 1600s. The sailor claimed they found a passage that should not exist, a channel that opened and closed according to no natural tide. He claimed their cartographer, a woman, went into that passage alone and did not return. When they searched for her, they found only her instruments and a single page of her map. On it, she had written, "The ice has a voice. It calls to those who chart it. It wants to be mapped, but not by human hands." Beneath this, my father had added a final note in hurried script. "I told Corbett I would not pursue this matter further. He paid me anyway and told me to keep silent. Tonight, I heard singing outside my window. The same melody he had hummed while showing me that cursed letter. I am afraid." I did not sleep that night. And when morning came, I found a note slipped beneath my door. It was written in Mr. Pierce's careful hand. "Your presence is required at the office at midnight tonight. Come alone. Bring your father's journals." I did not bring my father's journals. Instead, I hid them in the cellar of the boarding house, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked behind a loose stone in the foundation wall. Mrs. Beatrice Webb, the landlady, a stout woman with kind eyes and hands roughened by years of washing linens, found me there just before supper. "Ruth," she said quietly, "you look like death itself is chasing you." I nearly laughed at how close to truth she had come. "I'm well enough," I lied. She descended the cellar stairs and stood beside me in the dim light. "I've kept this house for 30 years. I've seen young women come and go, and I've learned to recognize when one is in danger." She touched my shoulder. "If you need help, child, you need only ask." I wanted to tell her everything, but how could I explain that a 200-year-old map was speaking to me, that my employer locked me in rooms and demanded I work through the night, that I heard singing in empty spaces and saw ink rearrange itself into warnings? "I'm managing," I said instead. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, but my door is always open." She paused at the stairs. "And Ruth, if you must go out tonight, take the back way. There's been a man watching the house these past 2 evenings. Tall fellow in a black coat. He stands across the street and doesn't move for hours." My blood went cold. "Thank you, Mrs. Webb." That night, I approached the Miller Cartography office by the alley behind Market Street. The building was dark, save for a single light burning in Mr. Pierce's office window. I climbed the back stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight, and found the rear door unlocked. The office was silent, too silent. The usual sounds of the street horses, distant voices, the rattle of carriages all seemed muffled, as though the building itself had been wrapped in wool. "Mr. Pierce?" I called softly. No answer. I moved through the main drafting room, toward the storage area where I'd been working. My desk lamp was lit, though I had extinguished it before leaving that morning. The ancient chart lay spread across the surface, and beside it sat a stack of papers I had never seen before. They were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age, written in various hands spanning centuries. I lifted the first and read by the lamplight. To the directors of the Dutch East India Company, dated February 1698. It is with great sorrow that I report the loss of our cartographer, Miss Elara Vance, who vanished while surveying the Northern Passage. Her instruments were recovered, but her body was not found. Her final map fragment depicts a channel that appears and disappears according to no known principle. I humbly submit that we abandon this route and speak of it no more. Captain Jan Hendrik Vorst. The next letter was dated 1821. To the Royal Geographic Society, I must report a disturbing discovery during our expedition to the Arctic territories. We encountered a passage matching the description in the Vance fragment, a channel that opens only under specific lunar conditions. 3 of our men entered to take measurements. Only 1 returned. He spoke of singing ice and moving shadows. He died of frostbite 3 days later, but not before drawing a map identical to the one supposedly lost with Vance in 1697. How could he have known? We buried the map with him, Lieutenant Charles Abernathy. Letter after letter spanning 2 centuries. Each described expeditions that had sought the passage. Each reported deaths, disappearances, madness. And each mentioned the map, always the same map, always incomplete, always appearing in the hands of cartographers who had never seen the original. The final letter was dated 1873. My hands shook as I recognized my father's handwriting. "Mr. Corbett, I have reconsidered your commission and must decline. The work you ask is not merely cartography, but something far darker. I have studied the Vance fragment you provided, and I have concluded that it is not a map of a place but a map of a trap. Whatever passage she found, it was not meant for human travel. I am returning your payment and all materials. I ask that you not contact me again. Thomas Morgan." Footsteps sounded behind me. I turned to find Mr. Pierce standing in the doorway, his pale eyes reflecting the lamplight. Behind him stood the man in black, the one Mrs. Webb had seen watching the boarding house. In the lamplight, I could finally see his face. It was gaunt, angular, ageless, in a way that made my skin crawl. "You did not bring the journals," Mr. Pierce said. "No." "That is unfortunate." He stepped into the room. "Your father was wiser than you, Miss Morgan. He understood when to stop asking questions." The man in black moved to the desk and placed one long finger on the ancient chart. "The map must be completed," he said in that soft, terrible voice. "Every 50 years, someone must attempt the rendering. Every 50 years, the passage opens wider. Soon it will not need a cartographer to call it forth. Soon it will open on its own." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, though fear made my voice small. "The ice has memory," the man said. "It remembers those who chart it. Elara Vance was the first, but she will not be the last. Each cartographer who works on her map adds their essence to it. Each one brings the passage closer to permanence." He smiled, and his teeth were too white, too perfect. "Your father refused, but you have already begun. Your ink is on the chart now. You are bound to it." I looked down at the map. In the sections I had completed, I saw my own notations, coordinates, depth soundings, coastal features. But woven between them, so faint I had not noticed before, were other marks, symbols that were not cartographic, patterns that hurt to look at directly. "What happens when it's finished?" I whispered. "The passage opens fully," Mr. Pierce said, "and what waits beyond comes through." I grabbed the lamp and hurled it at the map. The oil spread across the ancient parchment, and flames erupted instantly. Mr. Pierce shouted and lunged forward, but the fire moved faster than natural fire should. It consumed the chart in seconds, then leaped to the stacked letters, the desk, the walls. The man in black did not move. He simply watched as the fire spread, his expression serene. "Foolish girl," he said softly. "You cannot burn what exists in multiple places. The map is merely a reflection. The passage is already open." I ran. Behind me, I heard no pursuit, only singing that cold, wordless melody rising above the crackle of flames. It followed me into the street, into the night, all the way back to my boarding house. Mrs. Webb was waiting when I burst through the door. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside. "What happened?" "The office, there's a fire." "I know," she said grimly. "I saw the smoke. Ruth, listen to me carefully. You need to leave this town tonight." I stared at her. "How did you—" "Because I've seen this before." She gripped my shoulders. 30 years ago, there was another young woman who worked for Mr. Pierce. She was completing a map, just like you. One night the office burned. They found her body in the ruins, but her hands were frozen solid despite the heat, frozen and blackened, as though she'd been handling ice. My legs nearly gave out. Mr. Pierce doesn't age, Ruth. The building was rebuilt, but he returned to the same office, the same work. Every few decades, he finds a new cartographer. And every time, someone dies. What is he? I don't know, but I know you must leave. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to pack my belongings and flee into the night, but I thought of my father's journals hidden in the cellar. I thought of Elara Vance, lost 200 years ago in the Arctic ice. I thought of all the cartographers who had died trying to complete what she had started. "No," I said slowly. "If I run, he'll find another. This has to end." Mrs. Webb's eyes filled with a fierce respect. "Then you'll need help." She led me to her private rooms and produced a wooden box from beneath her bed. Inside were newspaper clippings, letters, and a small leather journal. "My sister was the woman who died 30 years ago, Mrs. Webb said quietly. "Her name was Hannah. Before she died, she left me this. She said if the man in black ever returned, someone would need to know the truth." I opened the journal and read by candlelight. Hannah Webb had documented everything: the strange commissions, the locked rooms, the singing in empty spaces. But more than that, she had researched. She had found records of the Dutch East India Company, of Arctic expeditions, of disappeared cartographers. And she had found something else. A pattern. Every 50 years, someone attempted to complete Elara Vance's map. And every 50 years, on the night of the new moon in March, the passage she had discovered would attempt to open. The cartographer's work served as an anchor, a beacon to guide whatever waited beyond into our world. But there was a counter pattern, a way to close the passage permanently. The original map had to be destroyed, not the copies, but the first rendering Elara Vance had made with her own hands in the Arctic ice. And that map, according to Hannah's research, was not in the Miller Cartography office. It had never left the Arctic. It was still there, frozen in the place where Elara Vance had last stood, 200 years ago. "This is impossible," I breathed. "Perhaps," Mrs. Webb said, "but it's the only answer my sister found." I looked up at her. "I can't travel to the Arctic." "No," she agreed, "but you can find someone who has." In my father's journals, I had read of his correspondence with other surveyors, other cartographers. Some had traveled extensively. Some had connections to explorers and expedition societies. One name appeared repeatedly: Daniel Freeman, a Negro surveyor and Arctic veteran who had settled in Boston after retiring from exploration work. "He might help," I said slowly, "if he believed me." "Then you must make him believe." I spent the remainder of the night writing a letter. I documented everything: the map, the singing, the fire, the pattern Hannah Webb had discovered. I included pages from my father's journals and asked Daniel Freeman to meet me in Charlotte within the week. At dawn, I posted the letter. And then I waited. 3 days later, the reply came. Miss Morgan, I received your letter with great alarm. I knew your father. I respected him. If what you say is true, I will come. But know this, I have seen the ice of the far north, and I have heard things in that frozen silence that no man should hear. If the passage you speak of is real, opening it would doom us all. I will arrive in Charlotte on the morning of April 1st. Be ready to prove everything, Daniel Freeman. Mr. Pierce came for me on the night before Daniel Freeman was set to arrive. I had been staying in Mrs. Webb's private quarters, sleeping with a chair propped against the door, and my father's surveying compass clutched in my hand like a talisman. Mrs. Webb herself slept little, keeping watch from her parlor window for any sign of the man in black. But they did not come through the front door. I woke to the smell of ice. It is difficult to describe that scent, sharp and clean and utterly wrong for a North Carolina spring night. It smelled like the air had been scraped hollow, like winter distilled to its cruelest essence. The temperature in the room had plummeted. My breath misted before my face. Frost crept across the window panes in spiraling patterns that hurt to observe, angles that bent wrong, curves that looped back through themselves. And standing at the foot of my bed was Mr. Pierce. You have caused considerable difficulty, Miss Morgan, he said quietly. I scrambled backward, pressing against the headboard. How did you? The map knows where you are. He moved closer, and I saw that his eyes had changed. They were no longer merely pale but colorless, like ice that had never known sun. You put your ink upon it. Your hand rendered the northern coastline. You are connected now, whether you wish it or not. I destroyed the map. You destroyed a copy. His smile was gentle, pitying. The true map cannot be burned. It exists in a place beyond flame, beyond time. Elara Vance drew it with water from the passage itself, and it will endure until the passage is fully opened. The door burst open. Mrs. Webb stood there with an oil lamp raised high and a long kitchen knife in her other hand. Get away from her, she commanded. Mr. Pierce did not even glance at her. The sister of Hannah Webb. I remember you. You were but a child when your sister died. You watched from the window as they carried her frozen body from the ruins. Mrs. Webb's face went rigid. You murdered her. No, he shook his head slowly. She murdered herself. She tried to destroy the map, just as your young Miss Morgan did. The passage responded. The ice came through. He finally turned to look at Mrs. Webb. Your sister screamed for 3 minutes as the frost took her from the inside out. Would you like to know her final words? Stop, I said. She called your name, Mr. Pierce continued, ignoring me. She begged the ice to spare you. It listened. You have lived these 30 years because Hannah Webb traded her death for your life. He tilted his head. Will you trade yourself for Miss Morgan? Mrs. Webb's hand trembled, but her voice remained steady. If I must. No. I threw off the blankets and stood, though my legs shook. This ends tonight. Where is the man in black? Where is your master? Something flickered across Mr. Pierce's face. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. He is not my master, Pierce said softly. He is my predecessor, the cartographer before your father's generation. He completed his map in 1846 and has been bound to the passage ever since. His colorless eyes fixed on me. That is the true price, Miss Morgan. Complete the map, and you become its keeper. Fail to complete it, and you die in the attempt. There is no third path. You're wrong. I reached into the pocket of my nightdress and withdrew the letter from Daniel Freeman. There is another way. The original map can be destroyed. For the first time, Mr. Pierce's composure cracked. His face went rigid. That is impossible. No one knows where Elara Vance made her final stand. My father knew. It was a lie, but I said it with conviction. He left coordinates in his journals. Daniel Freeman has connections to Arctic expeditions. If the original map is destroyed, the passage closes forever. All of this ends. The temperature plummeted further. Ice crystallized on the walls, spreading in those wrong, spiraling patterns. The lamp in Mrs. Webb's hand guttered, and in the dimness, I saw something moving behind Mr. Pierce, a shadow that was darker than shadow, shaped like a man but hollow, empty, cold. The man in black had arrived. "You will not reach the Arctic," the shadow figure said. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You will complete the map, or you will die tonight in this room, with the old woman beside you." "Then kill me," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "But know this, Daniel Freeman already has copies of my father's journals. If I die, he will still pursue this. And he is not alone. There are other surveyors, explorers, cartographers who have studied the Vance fragment and know what you are trying to do. Kill me, and you only make them more determined." Another lie. But the shadow figure hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Mrs. Webb acted. She hurled the oil lamp not at Mr. Pierce but at the frost-covered wall. The glass shattered, and flames erupted across the ice patterns. Something screamed not with a human voice, but with the sound of glaciers calving, of frozen continents cracking. The shadow figure recoiled, and Mr. Pierce staggered backward. "Run!" Mrs. Webb shouted. We ran. Down the stairs, through the boarding house, out into the street where the spring night air felt like summer warmth after the frozen hell of my room. Behind us, the boarding house groaned and shuddered. Ice crept across its facade, glittering in the moonlight. Other residents poured from the building in their nightclothes, shouting in confusion and alarm. I grabbed Mrs. Webb's arm and pulled her away before anyone could ask questions. We didn't stop running until we reached the train station at the edge of town. The night clerk looked up in surprise as we burst through the door, 2 women in nightdresses, barefoot, wild-eyed. "We need 2 tickets to Boston," I gasped, pulling coins from the pocket of my dress. "The first train." "That's the 5 o'clock to Richmond with connections," the clerk said slowly. "But that's not until morning." "We'll wait." I pushed the coins across the counter. "Please." He studied us for a long moment, then nodded and prepared the tickets. Mrs. Webb and I huddled on a bench in the corner of the station, wrapped in donated blankets from the clerk, and watched the darkness beyond the windows. The boarding house was visible from here, a distant shape crowned with frost that gleamed like a frozen star. "My home, Mrs." Webb said quietly. 30 years I kept that house. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She squeezed my hand. "My sister sacrificed herself to save me. The least I can do is sacrifice a building to save you." We sat in silence until dawn broke across the eastern horizon. As the sun rose, the ice on the boarding house began to melt. By the time our train arrived, it looked almost normal, just another building on Elm Street, its secrets hidden once more. But I knew Mr. Pierce would rebuild. I knew the pattern would continue. Unless I found a way to end it. The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a hiss of steam. As we boarded, I looked back one final time at the town where my father had lived and died, where I had thought to make a quiet life with my needle and my maps. That life was gone now, burned away like the chart in the office fire. What remained was a promise to my father, to Elara Vance, to all the cartographers who had died trying to map the impossible. I would find the original chart. I would destroy it. Or I would die in the Arctic ice, just as Elara Vance had 200 years before. Daniel Freeman was not what I expected. I had imagined a weathered old explorer, grizzled and stern, perhaps missing fingers to frostbite, or bearing scars from encounters with polar bears. Instead, the man who met us at the Boston station was perhaps 40 years of age, clean-shaven, dressed in a neat brown suit, with spectacles perched on his nose and a leather satchel tucked under one arm. He recognized me immediately, perhaps by the desperate look that still haunted my eyes, or perhaps because I was one of few Negro women traveling without male escort. "Miss Morgan," he said, extending his hand, "and you must be Mrs. Webb. Your telegram from Richmond suggested urgency. I've secured us a private room at a coffee house nearby. We can speak freely there." The coffee house was in a Negro neighborhood near the waterfront, a warm space that smelled of roasted beans and pipe tobacco. Daniel led us to a back room and closed the door before spreading the contents of his satchel across the table. Maps. Dozens of them. Arctic surveys, nautical charts, sketches of coastlines I had never seen. "I did not fully believe your letter," he said without preamble, "but I also did not disbelieve it. Your father was a careful man. If he feared something enough to write warnings in his journals, that fear was earned." He pulled out a folded document and smoothed it across the table. "I traveled with an expedition in 1883. We surveyed the northern coast of Canada, searching for a passage that could facilitate trade routes. We found something else instead." The document was a map fragment, aged, water-stained, but unmistakable. It matched the style of the chart I had worked on in Mr. Pierce's office. "Where did you find this?" I breathed. "Embedded in ice on an unnamed island. It took us 3 days to extract it without damaging the parchment. Our expedition leader dismissed it as debris from an earlier voyage." "But I studied cartography under your father, Miss Morgan. I recognized quality when I saw it. This was drawn by a master's hand." "Elara Vance," I said. Daniel nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. After receiving your letter, I researched what records I could find. The Dutch East India Company kept meticulous logs, and the Maritime Archives here in Boston hold copies. Elara Vance was real. She was the first woman officially commissioned as an expedition cartographer, though the company tried to bury that fact after she disappeared." He produced another document, a ship's manifest from 1697. "She sailed on the Vrou Margaretha under Captain Vorst. The expedition lost 7 men to scurvy, 3 to accidents, and one Elara Vance simply vanished. The official report states she went ashore to survey and never returned, but I found something else in the archives." He pulled out a crumbling letter, its ink faded to brown. "A private correspondence from the ship's surgeon to his brother in Amsterdam, written after the expedition returned. I read it by the lamplight. I write to you now with a burden I cannot share with any other. The woman cartographer who accompanied us, Miss Vance, did not die, as Captain Vorst reported. She went into the passage willingly. We all heard the singing, though the captain forbade us to speak of it. Miss Vance heard it most clearly. She said the ice was calling her, that it wanted her to map what lay beyond. We begged her not to go, but she was compelled. I watched her walk into that impossible channel, and I swear upon my soul, brother, the ice itself opened before her like a throat-swallowing prey. When we searched for her the next day, the passage had closed. We found only her instruments and this fragment of map, still wet with ink, though she had carried no inkwell. The captain burned her other works and told us to speak of it never. But I fear we have unleashed something terrible by bringing her to that place." Mrs. Webb crossed herself. "Lord, have mercy." "It gets worse," Daniel said grimly. He spread out additional documents, reports from subsequent expeditions spanning 2 centuries. Every 50 years, someone attempts to map that region. Every 50 years, people die or disappear. The pattern is undeniable. Hannah found the same pattern, Mrs. Webb said quietly. But she also found a solution. The original map must be destroyed. Daniel removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, a gesture I recognized as him gathering his thoughts. "I have consulted with colleagues in the Royal Geographic Society and the American Geographical Union. No one has successfully charted that passage. Several expeditions have tried. All have failed. Most have ended in tragedy." "But you know where it is," I said. It was not a question. "I believe so." He pointed to coordinates on one of his maps. "Based on the fragment I found and the descriptions in the historical records, the passage lies here approximately 74 degrees north latitude, near the western coast of Devon Island in the Canadian Arctic. It's one of the most remote and inhospitable places on Earth. Can we reach it?" Daniel hesitated. An expedition to that region would require months of preparation, significant funding, and a crew willing to face almost certain death. "We would need to depart before summer's end, to reach the location, and return before the autumn freeze. Miss Morgan, what you're asking is nearly impossible." "Nearly," I said, "but not entirely." He studied my face for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Your father said you inherited his stubbornness along with his skill. I see he was correct." He gathered his maps. "I have contacts, other explorers, ship captains, surveyors who owe me favors. or who might be convinced to undertake such a journey. But even with help, we face significant obstacles. The greatest being time. It's already April. To reach the Arctic and return safely, we would need to depart within 6 weeks. Then we begin immediately. Over the following days, Daniel Freeman worked tirelessly. He sent telegrams to colleagues across North America and Europe. He contacted ship captains in Halifax and Newfoundland. He negotiated with supply merchants and sought funding from private investors who might support a geographic expedition. Mrs. Webb and I assisted however we could. I drew detailed copies of every map and document, creating a record that could survive if we did not. Mrs. Webb used her savings to secure our lodgings and wrote letters to everyone in her acquaintance who might provide financial support. It was slow work and frustrating. Many of Daniel's contacts were intrigued, but ultimately declined. The risks were too great, the timeline too compressed, the destination too remote. But on the 15th of April, we received a telegram that changed everything. Freeman, heard of your expedition. Have ship and crew. Sailed those waters before. Lost a brother there in '79. Want answers. Will depart Halifax June 1st with or without you. Captain Marcus Webb. Mrs. Webb went pale. That's my nephew, she whispered. Hannah's son. He was only a boy when his mother died. I didn't know he'd become a ship captain. Daniel looked at her with new understanding. Then this truly is a family matter. Will he help us? If he's anything like his mother, he'll do more than help, Mrs. Webb said. He'll see this through to the end. We departed for Halifax the next day. Captain Marcus Webb met us at the docks beside a sturdy three-masted ship called the Remembrance. He was a tall man with his mother's keen eyes and his aunt's steady demeanor. When he saw Mrs. Webb, his composure cracked. Aunt Beatrice, he said, embracing her. I never thought when I heard about the boarding house fire. I'm well, Marcus. We're all well, thanks to Miss Morgan's quick thinking. She pulled back and studied his face. You look so much like your mother. I have her journals, he said quietly. Everything she learned about the map, the passage, the pattern. When your telegram arrived asking for expedition support, I knew it was time to finish what she started. He turned to me and Daniel. I've assembled a crew of 12 men, all experienced Arctic sailors, all volunteers who understand the risks. We have supplies for 4 months. My ship is ice reinforced. We sail with the tide on June 1st. We'll be ready, Daniel said. But as we toured the Remembrance and reviewed the expedition plans, a cold certainty settled in my bones. Mr. Pierce would not simply allow us to destroy his work. The man in black, the cartographer from 1846, would not stand idle while we attempted to close the passage. They would follow us, or they would be waiting when we arrived. That night, I stood alone on the Halifax docks and watched the stars emerge above the harbor. Somewhere to the north, beyond the horizon, lay the Arctic ice. Somewhere in that frozen expanse was the place where Elara Vance had made her final stand. And somewhere in the shadows of this very city, I felt certain Mr. Pierce was watching, waiting, planning his own journey north. I touched the compass my father had left me, its brass surface worn smooth by years of his hand holding it. The needle pointed steadily north, unwavering. I'm coming, I whispered to the night, to Elara Vance's ghost, to all the lost cartographers. I'm going to finish what you started. I'm going to close the passage and end this. The compass needle trembled in my palm. Just once. Just enough to tell me something had heard. The Atlantic was merciless that summer. We departed Halifax on schedule, the Remembrance cutting through gray waters beneath a pewter sky. For the first 3 days, I could not keep food down. The ship rolled and pitched with each wave, and I spent most hours clinging to a bucket in the small cabin I shared with Mrs. Webb. You'll find your sea legs, she assured me, but her own face was pale. Only Daniel seemed unaffected. He spent his days on deck, reviewing charts with Captain Webb and discussing the route we would take. Northward through the Labrador Sea, past the southern tip of Greenland, then westward through Davis Strait toward Baffin Bay, and finally into the channels of the Canadian Arctic archipelago. The journey would take weeks. On the 6th day, I emerged from the cabin to find the air had changed. It was colder now, sharp with a bite that cut through even my heavy wool coat. Ice had begun to appear on the water, small chunks at first, drifting past the hull like white tombstones. "Pack ice," one of the sailors explained when he saw me staring. His name was Joseph, a weathered man with frostbite scars across his cheeks. "Gets thicker the farther north we go. The Remembrance can handle it, but we'll need to move careful like." By the end of the second week, the ice was everywhere. It formed channels and passages through which Captain Webb navigated with skill born of years in these waters. The temperature had dropped so precipitously that frost formed on the rigging each night and had to be knocked free each morning before it could weaken the ropes. And always, beneath the creak of the ship and the whisper of wind through canvas, I heard it. Singing. Not constantly, not even frequently, but in the quiet moments, in the deep watches of the night, in the stillness before dawn, I would wake to that wordless melody drifting across the ice. The same song I had heard in Mr. Pierce's office. The same impossible tune that had no source. "Do you hear it?" I asked Daniel one morning as we stood on deck reviewing the navigation charts. He didn't ask what I meant. "Since the 3rd day," he admitted quietly, "I thought I was imagining it." "You're not." I looked out across the ice fields. "It's the passage. It knows we're coming." "Can ice know anything?" "I don't think it's the ice that knows. I touched my father's compass, which I now wore on a chain around my neck. I think it's what lives beyond the passage." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Morgan, Ruth, if we succeed in destroying Elara Vance's original map, what do you think will happen to those who have been bound to it? Mr. Pierce, the man in black. How many others might exist, trapped between our world and whatever lies beyond?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I know what will happen if we fail. The passage will open fully, and something that has been trying to enter our world for 200 years will finally succeed." On the 23rd day of June, we reached the coordinates Daniel had marked the waters off Devon Island, where he had found the map fragment 14 years prior. Captain Webb ordered the anchor dropped in a sheltered bay, and we prepared for the land expedition. 6 of us would go ashore. Daniel, myself, Captain Webb, Mrs. Webb, who refused to remain on the ship, and 2 sailors, Joseph, and a younger man named Thomas. We would take supplies for 3 days, surveying equipment, and most importantly, the means to destroy the map should we find it. Daniel had brought thermite charges, chemical compounds that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt rock. If Elara Vance's original map was preserved in ice, the thermite would destroy it completely. We loaded 2 sledges and set out across the ice at dawn. The landscape was unlike anything I had ever seen. Ice stretched in every direction, white and blue and gray, shaped by wind into ridges and valleys that seemed to shift in the corner of my eye. The sun hung low on the horizon, circling endlessly without setting, casting long shadows that moved wrong, bending where they should be straight. And the singing was louder here, much louder. "Stay close," Captain Webb commanded. "In whiteout conditions, you can lose sight of someone 10 feet away. If separated, stop moving and call out, 'Do not wander.'" We walked for hours. The ice crunched beneath our boots and our breath misted before our faces. The cold was profound, a living thing that sought any gap in our clothing, any exposed skin, any weakness to exploit. Near midday, Daniel stopped abruptly. "There," he said, pointing. Ahead, the ice had formed a peculiar structure, a ridge that rose like a frozen wave, curving upward and over itself in a pattern that defied natural formation. At its base was darkness, a gap, perhaps, or a shadow that was somehow darker than it should be. "That's where I found the fragment," Daniel said quietly, "inside that formation." We approached carefully, weapons ready, though we had no idea what we might need to fight. As we drew closer, I realized the dark gap was not shadow, but an opening, a passage into the ice itself. The singing poured from it like water. "Sweet Lord," Mrs. Webb breathed. I stepped forward, compass in hand. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle on any direction. I knelt at the entrance and looked inside. The passage extended deep into the ice, its walls smooth as glass and carved with those impossible patterns, spirals that hurt to follow, angles that bent in directions eyes were not meant to perceive. And deep within, perhaps 50 yards distant, something glowed. Not with warmth, but with cold light, blue-white and terrible. "Her map," I whispered. "How can it still glow after 200 years?" Thomas asked, his voice shaking. "Because it was never drawn with ordinary ink," Daniel said. The surgeon's letter mentioned she had no inkwell, yet her map was wet with fresh ink. She must have used water from the passage itself, water that was never meant to exist in our world. I stood and began removing my pack. "I'm going in." "Not alone," Daniel said immediately. "Someone has to stay here and maintain the rope." I countered. "And if something goes wrong, you'll need to seal the passage behind me. Use the thermite charges. Bring the whole structure down if you must." "Ruth," Mrs. Webb began. "I'm the cartographer," I said gently. "This is my work to finish." After a long moment, Captain Webb nodded. He tied a rope around my waist, 200 feet of strong hemp that would allow me to reach the glowing object and return. The others would remain at the entrance, maintaining tension on the line. "If you tug 3 times, we pull you out immediately," Captain Webb said. "No arguments." "Understood." I took a lantern, though I doubted I would need it, and stepped into the passage. The ice walls closed around me, smooth and impossibly clear. I could see shapes moving within them, not reflections, but something else, shadows that had depth and substance. They watched me pass with eyeless attention. The singing grew louder with each step. It was not beautiful, though it had a terrible elegance. It was the sound of something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman trying to communicate in a language that human throats were never meant to form. I walked deeper, my boots finding purchase on ice that should have been slick, but somehow held firm. The rope paid out behind me, and I counted my steps. 20, 40, 60. At 100 steps, I reached the source of the light. It was a map, Elara Vance's map. It hung suspended in the ice, perfectly preserved, glowing with that cold blue light that cast no heat. I could see every detail the coastline she had rendered, the notations in her careful hand, the places where she had marked warnings. And I could see something else. The map was moving. Not the ice around it, but the map itself. The lines shifted and rearranged, forming new patterns, new passages, new warnings. And as I watched, new words appeared in that delicate script. "You came, just as I knew you would, just as all cartographers must in the end." "Elara?" I whispered. "Not Elara, not anymore. I have been here too long. I have mapped too much of what lies beyond. I am part of the passage now, as you will be if you do not flee. I came to destroy your map, to close the passage. You cannot destroy what is already destroyed. Look closer." I leaned in, and horror washed through me. The map was not drawn on parchment. It was drawn on skin, preserved, frozen, but unmistakably human skin. Elara Vance had drawn her final map on her own body. The passage demanded a price. The words appeared. It wanted to be mapped completely. To exist fully in your world, it needed a cartographer to render it in flesh and blood. I gave myself willingly. I thought I could control it. I was wrong. Then how do I stop it? You don't. You can only choose who pays the price. Complete the map, and the passage opens fully. Destroy me, and another must take my place. There is always another cartographer. Always another fool who thinks they can chart the impossible. "No," I said firmly. "I'm ending this. If I destroy you, the pattern breaks. No more deaths. No more lost cartographers." "Sweet child, there is no escape from what you are, from what we are. We are map makers. We cannot stop ourselves from trying to chart what has never been charted. Watch me." I pulled the thermite charges from my pack and began setting them around the frozen map. My hands shook, But my purpose was clear. Behind me, at the entrance to the passage, I heard shouting. The rope around my waist went taut, then slack, then taut again, the signal for danger. I looked back the way I had come, and saw Mr. Pierce standing at the entrance, silhouetted against the gray Arctic sky. Mr. Pierce was not alone. Behind him stood the man in black, and behind them both, I saw shadows, dozens of them, perhaps more, figures that were neither living nor dead, caught in the terrible space between, other cartographers. Other map makers who had been consumed by the passage across centuries. "Step away from the charges, Miss Morgan," Mr. Pierce called down the passage. His voice echoed strangely, multiplying until it seemed a chorus spoke his words. I stayed where I was, one hand on the thermite, the other on my father's compass. "You cannot stop this," Pierce continued, walking slowly into the passage. The ice did not crack beneath his feet. The pattern has held for 200 years. It will hold for 200 more. There must always be a cartographer. There must always be someone to maintain the map. "Then let it be you," I called back. "You've done this work for decades. Stay here. Free the rest of us." He smiled, and it was a sad, terrible expression. "I cannot. I tried once. 70 years ago, I walked into this passage just as you have, intending to destroy Elara Vance's work and end my own servitude. But the passage showed me the truth." He gestured to the frozen map behind me. "We are not servants of the map. We are the map. Every cartographer who has touched it, every hand that has drawn upon it, becomes part of its fabric. Destroy it, and you destroy us all." "Good," I said. That stopped him. "Ruth, no." Daniel's voice came from the entrance, strained. "If what he says is true—" "Then it's the only way," I finished. I turned back to Mr. Pierce. "How many have died because of this? How many more will die if it continues? If destroying the map means destroying you and everyone else who's been bound to it, then that's a price I'm willing to pay." "Including your father?" Pierce asked softly. My blood went cold. "What? Why do you think Thomas Morgan refused Corbett's commission so vehemently?" Pierce moved closer, and I saw pity in those colorless eyes. He had already worked on the map years before. A small section, commissioned under a different name, presented as simple Arctic survey work. By the time he realized what he had truly been mapping, it was too late. His ink was on the chart. He was bound to it. "You're lying." "Am I?" Pierce gestured, and one of the shadow figures drifted forward. As it entered, the cold light cast by Elara Vance's map, features resolved from the darkness. My father's features. "Ruth," the shadow said, and it was his voice. "Baby girl, you shouldn't have come here." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The thermite charges slipped from my numb fingers. "Papa?" My voice broke on the word. "I tried to warn you," the shadow of my father said. "In my journals, in my notes. I knew Pierce would find you eventually. I knew he would try to bind you as I was bound. I'm so sorry, Ruth. I'm so sorry I left you this burden." "But you died," I whispered. "You died of fever. I was there." I held your hand. "My body died," he confirmed. "But the part of me that touched the map, that part remains, caught here, neither living nor dead. This is what awaits all who chart the passage. This is the true cost." Tears froze on my cheeks. Behind me, I heard Mrs. Webb crying, heard Daniel speaking urgently to Captain Webb, arguing about something I couldn't focus on. All I could see was my father's ghost, trapped in ice for 2 years, while I had mourned his death and tried to build a life from the ruins he'd left behind. "Then I'll free you," I said, reaching again for the thermite charges. "I'll burn it all down. I'll burn the passage and the map and everyone trapped here. I'll set you free." "You'll kill me," my father's shadow said gently. "What remains of me exists only in the map. Destroy it, and I cease to be entirely, not just dead, but erased, as though I never existed." "You would want me to do it anyway," I said with certainty. "You would want me to stop this, no matter the cost." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "That's my girl. Yes, I would want you to burn it all." "No." The scream came not from Mr. Pierce, but from the man in black. He surged forward, moving faster than any living thing should, and grabbed my wrist before I could light the thermite fuse. His hand was cold, colder than ice, colder than death. Where he touched me, my skin blackened instantly, frost spreading up my arm like poison. "You will not destroy 2 centuries of work," he hissed. Up close, I could see that he was not truly a man, but a hollow thing wearing the shape of one. Inside his skin was only darkness and that terrible blue light. I gave everything to maintain this passage. I gave my life, my name, my soul. I will not let some ignorant girl undo it all. Pain lanced through my arm, but I didn't let go of the thermite. With my other hand, I pulled my father's compass and smashed it against the man in black's face. The brass shattered. The needle fell free. And where the needle touched him, he screamed. The brass compass needle magnetized, aligned always to true north, had been made from meteoric iron. My father had told me once that he'd crafted it himself from a fallen star, believing such metal held special properties for navigation. He had been more right than he'd known. The man in black released me and staggered backward, his face, if it could be called, a face bubbling and distorting where the needle had struck. The shadows that comprised his form writhed and pulled apart. "Iron from the heavens," my father's ghost said with wonder. "Ruth, use it. The passage cannot abide such metal." I grabbed the fallen needle, my frostbitten hand screaming in protest, and drove it into Elara Vance's frozen map. The reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The ice exploded outward in cracks that spread like lightning. The blue light intensified, became blinding, then suddenly extinguished completely. And the singing, that horrible, endless singing, rose to a shriek that shattered thought itself. The passage began to collapse. "Run!" Captain Webb's voice roared from the entrance. I ran. Behind me, I heard Mr. Pierce shouting something, heard the man in black howling in rage or agony. The rope around my waist went taut as Daniel and the others pulled, hauling me toward the entrance, even as ice rained down around me. The shadows of dead cartographers swirled past, some reaching for me, others simply dissolving into nothing as the map that had sustained them unraveled. I saw my father's ghost one final time. He wasn't reaching for me. He was smiling. "I'm proud of you, baby girl," he said. Then he was gone. I burst from the collapsing passage and into the arms of my companions. Captain Webb cut the rope and threw me over his shoulder, running for the sledges as the entire ice formation came down with a roar like world's ending. We ran across the Arctic ice, slipping and stumbling, as behind us the passage collapsed into itself. The blue light flashed one final time, impossibly bright, and then went dark. When we finally stopped, gasping and half frozen, and looked back, there was nothing. Just ice. Just the endless Arctic expanse under the circling sun. The singing was gone. Mrs. Webb held me as I wept for my father, for Elara Vance, for all the lost cartographers. My right hand was blackened from wrist to fingertips where the man in black had touched me. Daniel examined it with grave concern. "We need to get you back to the ship," he said quietly. "This frostbite is severe." "Is it over?" I asked. "Is the passage truly closed?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know we destroyed something that should never have existed. That has to count for something." We made our way back to the Remembrance. Captain Webb ordered immediate departure, and within hours we were sailing south, leaving the Arctic behind. But in the deep watches of the night, as the ship cut through dark waters toward home, I would sometimes wake and think I heard singing in the distance. Just an echo, perhaps. Or perhaps a warning that some passages, once opened, can never be fully closed. I am writing this final account from a hospital room in Boston, where the doctors have done what they could to save my hand. They could not save much. The frostbite damage was too severe. I have lost 3 fingers and most of the use of what remains. I will never draw a map again. Perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps that is the price the passage demanded, not my life, but my livelihood, my purpose. The remembrance returned to Halifax in late July. Mrs. Webb and I remained in Boston, where Daniel Freeman has taken responsibility for documenting our expedition. He has written extensive reports, filed with every geographic and maritime society that will receive them, detailing what we found in the Arctic. Most have dismissed his accounts as fanciful. Some have suggested the isolation and extreme cold caused hallucinations. A few have taken him seriously enough to launch their own expeditions to verify his findings. They will find nothing. I am certain of that. The passage has closed or hidden itself or retreated to some place beyond human reach. Perhaps it was never truly real in the way we understand reality. But the consequences were real enough. Mr. Pierce's cartography office in Charlotte burned completely on the night we returned from Halifax. The fire started in the storage room, the same room where I had worked on Elara Vance's map. Nothing was recovered. No maps, no records, no trace of the work that had been done there across decades. Mr. Pierce himself has vanished. Some say he fled south. Others claim to have seen him boarding a ship bound for Norway. I believe neither account. I think he simply ceased to be when the passage closed and the map was destroyed. The man in black, whoever or whatever he was, is gone as well. And my father, what remained of him, is finally at rest. Mrs. Webb has returned to Charlotte to rebuild her boarding house. Captain Marcus Webb has resumed his shipping business, though he no longer accepts commissions to Arctic waters. Daniel Freeman has retired from expedition work and now teaches cartography at a small college here in Boston. As for me, I have found work as a seamstress once more. My damaged hand makes the work difficult, but I manage. I take no commissions for map-related projects. I avoid cartography shops and geographic societies. I do not discuss the expedition, except in these official testimonies. But sometimes, in dreams, I return to that frozen passage. I see Elara Vance's map glowing in the ice. I see my father's ghost smiling as he dissolves into nothing. I see all those lost cartographers freed at last from their terrible service. And sometimes I wonder if I truly destroyed the passage, or if I merely closed one door while another remains hidden, waiting for the next cartographer foolish enough to seek it out. 3 weeks ago, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a fragment of old parchment yellowed with age, brittle at the edges. On it was drawn a section of coastline in a hand I recognized immediately as Elara Vance's. It was not the map we destroyed. It was something else, something older perhaps, or something that has survived despite our efforts. Beneath the drawing, in that delicate script, were 3 words. There are others. I burned the fragment immediately, watched it curl and blacken in my fireplace, reduced to ash that I scattered to the wind. But the words remain in my memory, and I know they will haunt me until I die. There are others, other passages, other maps, other cartographers, drawn to chart the impossible. The pattern, it seems, is older and deeper than I understood. We closed one door, but the hunger that created it, the human need to map and name and understand every corner of existence, that hunger remains. And where there is hunger, there will always be those who seek to feed it. I am writing this final account, not as a warning, though it may serve as one. I write it as a record, so that someone, someday, might understand what happened in the Arctic in the summer of 1897. So that if the singing returns, if another cartographer finds themselves compelled to complete Elara Vance's work, they will know what price awaits them. Map-making is sacred work. It brings order to chaos, understanding to the unknown. But some things are not meant to be mapped. Some territories exist only to consume those who would chart them. I learned this truth at the cost of my livelihood and my father's soul. I pray no one else need learn it at greater cost still. The compass my father made, the one whose needle destroyed the passage, was lost in the collapse. Sometimes I regret not recovering it, though I know it likely dissolved when the map unraveled. Still, I wish I had some piece of him to hold on to. Some reminder that he was real, that he was good, that he tried to protect me even in death. But perhaps the best reminder is this: I am alive. I survived. And I chose to end the pattern rather than perpetuate it, even when doing so cost me everything I loved. That was the lesson my father truly left me. Not how to draw maps, but how to know when to put the pen down, when to leave some spaces blank, when to accept that not all journeys need to be charted. I am done with cartography, done with maps, done with the endless human hunger to render every mystery as simple lines on parchment. Some mysteries should remain unsolved. Some passages should stay closed. And some songs are better left unsung. Archivist's note: this testimony was filed on September 15, 1897, by Ruth Morgan. She died of pneumonia on January 3, 1898, at the age of 25. Her body is buried in the Mount Hope Cemetery in Boston. Her father's journals were donated to the Boston Maritime Historical Society, where they remain in the restricted collection. Access requires special permission and written justification. Second archivist's note, added March 1947. This document was recently recovered during renovation of the Charlotte Municipal Records Office. It had been misfiled in the cellar archives and went undiscovered for 50 years. Upon reading it, I conducted research into the individuals named. Most records have been lost or destroyed, but I was able to confirm that a cartography office on Market Street in Charlotte did indeed burn in July 1897. The owner, listed as E. Pierce, was never seen again. I was also able to locate the maritime records for a ship called the Remembrance, captained by Marcus Webb. His final log entry, dated July 1897, makes brief mention of an expedition to Devon Island. No further details are provided. Make of this what you will. I am filing this document with full text preserved so that it might serve whatever purpose Ruth Morgan intended when she wrote it 50 years ago. May she rest in peace, and may her warning be heeded by those who would follow in Elara Vance's footsteps. If you found this account compelling, consider sharing it with others who study historical mysteries and forgotten testimonies. Where are you reading this from? What time is it in your corner of the world? We would be honored to know how far these recovered words have traveled, and whether they still carry weight in your modern age. Leave your thoughts in the records below for future archivists and for those who might yet need this warning. Some doors, once opened, echo across centuries. Some stories refuse to stay buried. This is one of them.